Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Rich Llewellyn, and we're going to go ahead and get started here. Just a few things before we get going. We'll ask you to keep your videos off, and we also have the audio muted. Questions will be through the chat. To find the chat, it's down at the bottom of the window for Zoom, and there's a little icon there that says chat. You can click on that, and it opens up a window, and you can type in questions there. I'll be watching those as we go along, and we'll be sure the speakers have a chance to address those. Today, we're going to hear from Antonina Broyaka. She'll be first, and looking at some of the issues with planting, with grain stocks, and with transportation issues. And then following her will be Allen Featherstone, department head here in Ag Econ, who's going to be looking at some of the other agricultural economies in the Black Sea area and the surrounding countries there. Antonina is a visiting professor here at K-State. She came from Ukraine here recently, and she is formerly at the Vinnytsia University there in Ukraine. She was a dean and department head in the past, and is now in Manhattan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to her and let her discuss some of the issues that she's bringing to us today. Antonina, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I was very pleased that my previous presentation about Russian-Ukrainian war impact had such a nice feedback, and that listeners asked me to do some updates. So I would talk a little bit what is going on now. As you know, the Russian invasion to Ukraine is continuing more than 2 months, and this makes great impact on the economy of Ukraine, neighboring countries, and the world. Despite the fact that Ukrainian army liberated the Kiev, Chernihiv, Sumy, Zhytomyr region, there is still a significant part of the territory of Ukraine remains occupied. In particular, you see Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Kharkiv regions. Unfortunately, Mariupol continues to be under the long siege. The city has humanitarian catastrophe. The occupiers do not allow the removal of civilians. The Russian army resorted to bombing, rockets, and artillery shelling of residential areas of cities, destroying civilian infrastructure, hospitals, schools, historical monuments, agricultural land. As a result of hostilities in Ukraine, an area of more than 80,000 square kilometers was mined, which is 13.6% of the total territory of Ukraine. Every day, State Emergency Service of Ukraine working on demining liberated territory. According to the latest report, the survived area was from the beginning of the war was around 80 square kilometers, that is 19,335 acres. The number of explosive items neutralized was almost 50,000 units, including almost 2,000 bombs. Potentially dangerous area to be survived is about 132,000 square kilometers. So even the war would be over today, it is necessary several years to clean up all the territory of Ukraine. According to the Sappers Association, at least $400 billion is needed to completely clear the land and put it into use. Significant share of this land is agricultural, that leads to decrease of sown crop areas. I think main group of today's listeners watched my previous presentation, so I will not repeat the main indicators of Ukrainian agricultural production, just remind that Ukraine is the biggest worldwide exporter of sunflower and top 10 exporter of corn, wheat, and other agricultural products. Ukraine is influential player in ensuring global food security. In previous marketing year, Ukraine exported almost 45 million tons of grain and legumes. Agricultural export is an important budget generating area for Ukraine. Agricultural products in 2021 were exported in almost of $27.7 billion, or almost 41% of total export of goods from Ukraine. At the moment, grain exports from Ukraine have been stopped, which means the world will face a lack of 6 million tons of Ukrainian wheat and 15 million tons of corn if the war will continue. Exports from Russia are also suspended, thus Russia will not supply about 4 million tons of grain. China, European Union, Egypt, Turkey, and Indonesia are the key buyers of Ukrainian grain. The share of Ukrainian grain is quite high on these markets. For example, in 2020-2021 marketing year, the share of Ukrainian corn totaled 29% in the overall import in China, and 25% in Egypt, and 55% in European Union. Ukraine provided 25% of Indonesian wheat import, 20% of Egyptian import, and 10% of Turkish purchase. Presence of Ukraine is more significant on world oilseed market. India, the European Union, and China are the key buyers of Ukrainian sunflower oil. In 2020-2021 marketing year, India imported 78% of its total sunflower oil purchase from Ukraine. The EU 88%, the China 68%. China and EU as well as Turkey purchased a high volume of Ukrainian sunflower meal. The share of Ukrainian product is the overall import by China, the European Union, and Turkey totaled 88%, 51%, and 34% correspondingly. Before the beginning of active hostilities, the main methods of grain export was sea shipping, up to 90% of all exported grain. The blockade of Ukrainian seaports forced to look for new logistical ways. Currently, the railway is the main grain-bearing artery at the western border, has been the main route for grain for foreign markets. However, throughput capacity is insignificant compared to the capabilities of sea transshipment. If Ukraine exported from 5 to 6 million tons of grain through the ports every month, with the possibility of transshipment up to 8 million tons, then Ukrainian railway, even working on the verge, now is be able to provide transportation to European direction no more than 1 million tons. In March 2022, the load of grain cargo transported via the Ukrainian railway amounted to 685,000 tons, or 8.6% of the total load of 7.97 million tons. The Ukrainian railway offers exporters to reload grain at certain terminals. Unfortunately, their current capacity is insufficient to ensure the export of all accumulated grain. The European side is also not ready to ensure the passage of a required number of wagons. More than 30,000 wagons have already accumulated at the border crossing in the western part of Ukraine. More than 5,000 are with grain, 500 with sunflower oil. Currently, the line for transfer of cargo reach from 20 to 30 days, depending on border crossing. Ukraine keeps working on a reorientation of export to rail and roads with the help of neighboring countries such as Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland, to build kind of grain bridge for about 20,000 trains. During the last months, Ukraine has resumed rail service in the liberated region that you can see on the map. It didn't work, and now that's working. But on April 27 and April 25, we had several attacks that circulated. You can see here on the map. So neighboring country continue to help us to continue export of grain to European Union and other countries on the world. On April 27, for example, Lithuanian Railways sent a test freight train to Ukraine. On the test run, the train carried about 2,000 tons of cargo through Poland to Lithuanian port. The German government has announcement its intention to export up to 52 containers from Ukraine by each train of DB Cargo, that is the name of the transportation company, to help deliver planet for export 2 million tons of grain that approximately exist. The DB Cargo offered to transport trains by rail to port on Adriatic and North Sea coast. Their grain could be transshipped and transported by ship to Estonia, Lebanon, and Indonesia. So Russia constantly tries to destroy Ukrainian railway infrastructure. Over the past weeks, Russia has launched missile attacks at a number of hub stations in western part of Ukraine, that I told that circled on the map. They also destroyed this, as you see, railway bridge across the Dniester estuary near the Toka that connect the southern part of Odessa region with the rest of Ukraine, and which was used to deliver cargoes to Dunai River ports. Railroad repairs are underway, but traffic across the bridge has already been restored and is carried out on one line in both directions. So now Ukraine deliver loads to the Dunai River ports through Moldova. Currently, Ukraine has positive dynamics of increasing delivery grain cargo loads by railway, both domestically and abroad. As you see on the slide, in March 2022, almost 11,000 wagons carried 685,000 tons were loaded with grain, which is 4 times less than the volume in February. That was 43.9 thousand wagons, or 2.91 million tons. As for the direction of loading, against the background of blocking ports due to military aggression by Russia, rail traffic in this direction is expected to decline. If in February more than 98% of all consignments of grain cargo were loaded in the direction of port, in March this share dropped to less than 4%. Accordingly, the share of traffic in the direction of railway border crossing on the western border in Ukraine in March increased to 55% against 2% in February. In April, this amount has increased up to 450,000 tons on domestic connection and 492,000 tons for export. Unfortunately, daily capacity is less than in 2021, that is understandable, and almost twice because of logistic difficulties and dangers. You can observe its dynamic for April on that diagram. Due to the growing demand for rail transport and inflation process, traffic for the transportation of grain cargo by rail in Ukraine in January through March 2022 increased. Tariffs for the transportation of grain cargo by rail in Ukraine in January through March 2022 increased by 15% compared to the first quarter of 2021. In the first quarter of 2022, the tariffs for the transportation of chemicals and mineral fertilizers increased more significantly by 41.7% compared to the same period in 2021. In general, tariffs for freight transportation by rail in Ukraine increased by 25.4% in the first 3 months of 2022. In general, through seaports, Ukraine has exported in 2021 more than 70% of all cargo, worth about $47 billion. Since February 24, the sea gauge have been blocked by Russian fleet and anti-ship mines. Up to 100 Ukrainian food-merged ships remain blocked by Russian troops in Ukrainian ports. Ukraine currently doesn't control 4 ports: Mariupol, Berdyansk, Kherson, and Skadovsk. These ports provided 7.5 of the total transshipment. That is not so much. The largest ports, which accounted more than 85 of sea cargo turnover, remained under Ukraine's control. That is Pivdenny, Mykolaiv, they're here. Pivdenny, Mykolaiv, Chernomorsk, Odessa, Olivia, ports are working to return the good, so businesses can take loads back and export their goods by road or by rail. Unfortunately, Mariupol seaport is completely destroyed. As of February 24, about 300,000 tons of cargoes were in Mariupol seaport. 6 vessels under loading were blocked, and later about 70% of administrative buildings located in the port were burned. Terminal was destroyed totally. Some silos were damaged. Cars were burned or took to Russian soldiers. Most of grain just disappeared. In the port of Kherson, which is here, the Russian stages a robbery. They stole tugboats, infrastructure, ground equipment, took grain shipments to the Crimea. Berdyansk port is here. Is occupied and used for shipment of the broken military equipment for Russia to Russia and delivery a new military equipment. The war created actually new opportunities for growth of 3 small ports at the mouth of Dunai, that is Izmail, Reni, and Ust-Dunai ports. Now they can transport the same volume as in peace time, but the potential of the Dunai direction is great. But to increase capacity, the railway infrastructure in this direction should be developed. Ukraine is making every effort to develop logistics across the Dunai. Bulgaria agreed to help make the port of Varna a logistic hub for transshipment of Ukrainian agricultural products. Romania has opened the possibility of transshipment of Ukrainian agricultural products through the port of Constantia. Ukraine has sent around 80,000 tons of grain to Romania Black Sea ports of Constantia so far, and the first Panamax vessel with 71,000 tons of Ukrainian corn recently left the Romanian port of Constantia. Also in Romania, the rail terminal hub Transylvania that located in Western Romania began to accept Ukrainian grain delivery by railway. This hub Transylvania is a private intermodal operator that provides logistics service for reloading of cargoes from rail to road transportation, and also the terminal has railway connection with the port of Constantia. Latvia is going to help Ukraine with grain exports through Latvian port. And under the most optimistic scenario, shipping in the Black Sea can be partially resumed in the fall if a number of conditions would achieve, such as ceasefire, safety of shipment, and the mining of water. The imposition of sanction against Russia and provision of benefits by the international community to Ukraine contribute to the support of Ukrainian economy. The European Union has proposed to suspend for a year import duties for all Ukrainian exports to the Ukrainian to the European Union, sorry. Ukrainian government also trying to support domestic producers to keep national economy working as much as possible. So during martial law, the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine abolished additional seed certification procedure, simplifies the labeling of imported food and feed, removed bureaucratic barrier of the export of licensing of permitted groups of goods, simplified registrations of agricultural machinery and equipment, etc.
Antonina, we have a question that I think might be a good time to ask it. It came into me.
Okay.
There's actually 3 involved here. The first one is, how much grain storage does Ukraine have?
How many?
How much total storage for grain?
For now, we have left like about 20 million tons of grain.
And so how much of the storage for grain is located at the ports versus how much is in the countryside?
So it's about, as I remember it now, I cannot say exactly how much now in the seaports, because some companies just take away the grain from the seaports. But I know that about 38% of grain is in occupied territory.
And regarding the storage, not so much the grain that's in existence, but how much of the storage, like what percentage is at the ports and how much is located in the countryside where it might not be so affected?
Unfortunately, I cannot answer this question right now, just to be correct in figures. I can check it and provide these figures later.
Okay, thanks. I think that covers it for now. Thank you.
So one of the important issue of limiting Russia's influence of the Black Sea market is blocking the Bosphorus and Dardanelles trades. The Turkish government, in accordance with the International Monroe Convention on the Status of the Straits, has blocked the passage of Russian military ships through 2 strategically important straits between the Mediterranean and Black Sea that you can see here on that map. So Ukraine asked Turkey and all the international community to block completely the movement of Russian ships through this strait, that Russia couldn't export stolen Ukrainian grain and other goods. The 5th package of European Union sanctions prohibited entry into sea and river ports for all ships registered under the Russian flag. And according to the European Commission, it would be almost 3,000 merchant ships which with the Russian flag and currently operated, and all of them will fall under the sanctions. And recently, the United States also has announced a ban of Russian-linked ships from entering American ports. So, as we can see, that losses of Russian invasion into Ukraine is huge. The total losses to the end of April content up to $600 billion. Among them, almost 120 billion falls on infrastructure. More than 23,000 kilometers of the road, almost 300 bridges, more than 4,224 hectares of land are destroyed. And Ukrainian economy is losing about 170 million every day due to the port blockade. We have significant grain losses, both due to the destruction of areas with winter crops and the inability to sow spring crops in hazardous areas, and due to the destruction of grain storage and stealing of grain. So like latest news that I watched and videos that I watched and read on April 27, the Russian Legislative Assembly of Krasnoyarsk territory published press release, we state that as part of the implementation of their strategy to support the Russian agro-industrial complex and the development of rural area, it adopted a resolution on the supply of agricultural products from Ukraine, in particular the delivery of grain from Kherson region, which is under the control of Russian military now, because due to the introduction of foreign sanctions, there is acute shortage of food in the Krasnoyarsk territory. Therefore, a decision was made to widely expropriate surplus crop and food from Ukrainian farmers. Official statistics shows that as of March 1st, 2022, the total availability of grain was almost 28.6 million tons, or more than 30% of total production in 2021. Analysis of the elevators shows that about 39% of storage facilities are located in dangerous and relatively safe region, and 16% are in the most dangerous region. In the absence of active export, the ending stocks in 2021-22 marketing year could be at a record 19.3 million tons. Among them, wheat would be 7.1 million tons, corn 12.68 million tons. And in 2022-2023 marketing year, the volume of carry over stocks may stabilize due expected production declines and a total 6.7 million tons. As of March 2022, about 45% of the sunflower seeds and 27% of soybean and 32% of rapeseed stocks were stored in area under continuous hostilities. The ending stocks for the 2021-2022 marketing year could be 4.7 million tons. Sunflower seeds has the highest share of domestic processing of the total production volume. Sunflower seeds segment had the main processing capacity of about 22 million tons per year. On average, over the last 10 years, the sunflower seed processing rate was 97–98%. However, there is a clear trend of dependence of oil production from export. With block ports, the volume of sunflower seeds processing will decrease significantly this season and will depend on only domestic demand and capacity of western borders. Sunflower seeds processing can decline up to 10.7 million tons in this marketing year. Given the current situation in Ukraine, in 2022, about 15.4 million hectares of spring crops can be sown, which is 85% of the total area before the full-scale war. The increase from the previous estimate was primarily due to the exemption from the temporary occupation of Kiev, Chernihiv, Sumy region, and some other territories. However, it will be impossible to sow on this area in full due to the destruction of the material base of agricultural producers, the theft of agricultural machinery by the Russian occupiers, mines on fields and roads, remnants of shells, military equipment in the field, lack of employees and finance to perform all work. As on April 22, Ukraine planted spring crops through the area of 3 million, more than 3 million hectares, or 17.9% of the previous forecast, including 1 million and a half hectares. 85.6% is planted of spring wheat, 60% of spring barley, 71% of oats. But the focus of sown area could be changed depending of the for the situation. According to estimate, the wheat harvest in Ukraine will be reduced 1.8 times this year to 18.2 million tons. However, this is almost 3 times more than Ukraine's consume wheat per year. Given to transitional stocks of wheat of almost 10 million tons that we expect its export in 2022-2023 marketing year may be about 10 million tons. In addition, this season, the country can harvest up to 6.2 million tons of barley. So its export next year is expected at 2 million tons. Corn harvest is expected in 2000 is expected at 23.1 million tons, and its export may reach about 20 million tons. So you can see this on this diagram. Because we have so much grain right now, and the logistic is kind of destroyed, so it will take about 40 months to export the all existing harvest and those ending stocks that we have under the blockade of seaports. Since the start of 2021-2022 marketing year till now, Ukraine has exported 45.7 million tons of grain and pulses. In April, Ukraine has exported 763 tons of grain and pulses, and the total includes 514 million tons of wheat, 5.6 million tons of barley, etc. that you can see on the table. With onset of military aggression due to limited export and increasing the value, world price for grain and oilseeds are rising. The indicative prices of wheat increased slightly, supported by tough global balance and concerns about sharp reduction of wheat supply due to the Russian-Ukrainian war, as well the poor condition of US wheat and deterioration of condition of crop in France. On the land border, the prices of wheat value pressured by limited number of importers from the EU and overloaded logistics. Due to considerable decline of the offers of sunflower oil as a result of Russian-Ukrainian war, global prices for palm and soybean oil were increasing. Exporters reported lack of containers for delivery of sunflower oil. So the prices will be supported by the lack of sunflower oil on the global market and increase of price of alternative edible oil. The indicative price of corn and barley have increased in March and were decreasing in April. The absence of new contracts, weak demand, high freight and insurance, low export and land by land and through alternative ports pressured the prices. Lower import by the European Union weighted on the corn prices too. Ukrainian wheat was offered for 375 per ton, and corn was traded with delivery in May from 230 to 275 per ton, depending on the port. Mostly, we concentrate attention of the grain market, but we saw with Dr. Featherstone on the registration some question about livestock in Ukraine. So I just added several slides to give you a quick look on the size of livestock in Ukraine. So as you can see, during the last 30 years, since the USSR collapsed, the structure of livestock changed a lot. And the biggest decline was among beef production due to very high production cost and price disparity. However, the poultry production had grown significantly, and Ukraine is the sixth on the world export of pork currently, and seventh of the export of chicken meat. So before the war started, we had more than 2.7 million of cattle, including 1.55 million of cows. We had 5.55 million of pigs and almost 194 million of chicken. More than half of livestock production is concentrated in households. 675.3 thousand of cattle, that is almost a quarter, 25% of total livestock, currently are in dangerous and occupied territory that I marked red. And there is no statistic that would provide clear information how much animals are killed or died due to the lack of feeding. But it is obvious that the meat and milk production and accordingly the export will decrease. Ukraine's heroic struggle against Russian aggression has intensified the need of rethink current economic processes in various countries, as well as the direction of their change. Today, developing countries are generally under the pressure from two shocks that were difficult to predict at the beginning of the year. Of course, the most important thing is the Russian aggression against Ukraine, which already has a significant impact on almost all countries in the world. And the second is the acceleration of global inflation, and the rate at a rate much higher than expected, caused at the same time by the anti-inflation policy of central banks. And of course, significant inflationary factor was aggression, which added value to the energy, agricultural, food, logistic chain, and others. Taking into account the main risk and shocks has already led to the adjustment in the direction of deterioration of the forecast of economic dynamics of the current years. And the almost a 0.5% decline in the growth rate of developed country is directly due to both a high inflation and the introduction of sanctions that significantly limited trade and capital flows, disrupt logistic chain and businesses' expectation. Geographically, indicators differ. The countries of Central and Eastern Europe together will not grow by more than 3% as expected at the beginning of the year, but will also have a decline in GDP of about 1%. Among the factors deteriorating the dynamic of GDP in Central and Eastern European countries are the shock of supply and demand in the same areas due to the higher inflation and interest rates, deterioration employment, falling purchasing power, in particular as a result of joint the sanctions policy. The significant economic costs and losses associated with influx of temporary migrants from Ukraine, especially to Poland, weakening economic growth in developing European countries, on which growing countries are dependent, especially from Germany. At the same time, the Russian economy will also suffer significant losses. According to the base version of the forecast of the Ministry of Economic Development of Russia as on April 27, the declines of Russia's economy in 2022 will be 8.8. According to the conservative, it's higher at 12.4. So inflation in Russia is expected, according to the basic forecast, about 20.7%, and the next it will also considerable, about 6%. But of course, all impact will depend from that, how the war will continue. So thank you very much. That's what I wanted to say you today. If you have any question, please, you're welcome.
And we, excuse me, we do have one so far, just asking, what is the morale or attitude, as well as the safety of the farm sector? If you could just discuss that a bit.
The farm safety now in the region of that is not occupied, it's pretty good, despite that some missile can arrive sometime, but the safety in the occupied territory is really bad. And now, as far I know, a lot of farmers suffers from Russian military that ask them to work for Russia, and they took all products from farmers, and they took a grain and everything. So, and they force farmers work for Russia, not for Ukraine, and they don't have any chance to do something else because they afraid of their life. So that is kind of situation right now. But in the western part of Ukraine, the agriculture safety is, I mean, for to crop to sow crops, that is not too bad.
And just related to that, the morale or the attitude in the western part, even, are farmers discouraged, perhaps not being able to get their grain exported and stuff like that, or are they pretty enthusiastic?
In the part of Ukraine that is not occupied, of course, farmers are more enthusiastic because they don't have war on their territory, but they still have some troubles with delivering fertilizers and deliver the grain for export. Yeah, there are some problems, and also there is some kind of shortage of labor. I see the question that somebody asked about the labor situation. Of course, a lot of people who are in a military age, they went to army to defend the country, so they're not able now to work for their farm, and they sometimes even ask for kind of vacation, if it's possible, for a few days, just to sow their land. And also a lot of Ukrainians left Ukraine, so of course we have some shortage of labor, but hopefully for sowing it would be enough to sow all spring crops. Something else?
The next one would be the question about fuel availability for the agricultural sector.
Fuel availability is getting worse for right now. Our government, and for example in my region, our local government also asked all operators, gas operators, fuel operators, to keep prices low, but prices grows, and delivery import of fuel is also limited because of blockade of seaports. So prices go up, but the fuel for agricultural sector is priority, and Ukrainian government and especially Ministry of Agriculture support agricultural sector to have the fuel to ensure sowing all crops.
The next one is, what percentage of farmland is currently occupied by Russian forces across the country?
In general, as I told, the occupied is more than 13.6%, as I remember. I think it was in my previous presentation.
Okay, thanks. A question, what sorts of technical or monetary assistance would be most beneficial for rebuilding the Ukrainian industry and agriculture?
Now, first of all, of course, Ukraine will need a lot of money, and now they count like $600 billion, and it's understandable that we will not get those money per 1 year, so it would be decade to rebuild all infrastructure and everything. But I think the technical support would be also good, especially for agricultural equipment and other equipment, because I saw a lot of videos. I all the time try to read and watch what is going on, how just Russians stole our tractors, our combines. So we really will need this, and also we will need a lot of medical support since many people were hurt, and also hospitals, a lot of hospitals are destroyed. So yeah, we will need not only monetary assistance, but also technical. But for a monetary assistance, it would be important just to get maybe more grants, not rather than loan, because it's understandable that Ukraine will not able to return those loans for next decade. So it would make a budget deficit bigger. So if other countries could provide some grants that they are doing right now, some of them, that would be very good.
Go ahead and take it away. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Allen Featherstone, our department head, and he's going to discuss some of the other things going on in the region there.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. One of the things that I also want to thank Kansas Wheat and Kansas Corn. They are supporting this series, and we certainly appreciate that. What I want to do today is just give you a view of what the other Black Sea agricultural production is. From time to time, we hear on the news that Moldova could be drawn into the conflict in terms of Belarus, which is to the northwest, could be drawn into the conflict. And so certainly we're wanting to take a look at that. And so the way this presentation is going to be looking at is we're going to look at Moldova, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, and Belarus. And so you will see that that surrounds Ukraine to the west of the region. In terms of giving you a view, the area there is listed. The population for Moldova, Romania, and Hungary are 3.2 million, 18.5, 9.7 million. The Ukrainian population before the exit was 42 million. And so that gives you a little bit of an indication of the population of surrounding countries compared to Ukraine. If you look at the GDP per capita, and these numbers are all from the CIA fact book, the real GDP in Moldova is about 12,300, Romania 28,800, Hungary 31,000. The real GDP in Ukraine is in the 12,000. If you look at the GDP, Moldova 17.7% agriculture, and then Romania and Hungary substantially less. Looking at the real GDP or the percentage of GDP of the Ukrainian economy, it's about 12.2%. You can see the agricultural share of labor, S&P 500, military expenditures, and then just some statistics with regards to age. And then if you look at the countries from the center to the north of Ukraine, you have Slovakia, Poland, and Belarus. You can look at the areas. Probably the big thing, Poland is really the only country around Ukraine that has similar type population at 38 million. You can see that these three countries all have a per capita GDP larger than Ukraine, which is at 12,000, relatively less dependent on the agricultural sector, both in terms of GDP and the share of labor. And then you have some other statistics at the end. These numbers are, again, the population projections by the UN through 2100. I know when I gave these for Ukraine, it was a big discussion item that the population of Ukraine is expected to increase by 43% by 2100. All of these projections were made in 2020. You can see in terms of the relative size of the populations there, it's important to realize that all of the countries in this part of the world are going to decline in population according to the UN by 21 to roughly 50%. And so the birth rates and just the depopulation of these regions is expected to be fairly large over the next period of time. The same period for Ukraine was 43.5% decline. Russia is expecting a 13.5% decline. In terms of arable land and looking at arable land Ukraine has about 34 million hectares. And so you can see that looking at these countries in the amount of arable land, you can see that Poland has the most, followed by Romania, then Belarus, Hungary, and then Moldova and Slovakia are very close. If you combine all of these together, one of the things that's interesting is that if you add the 6 countries to the western part of Ukraine and add those numbers up, it roughly equals the amount of Ukraine. And so it just shows the importance that Ukraine is. And then from a world perspective, the most recent numbers are 2019. And again, these numbers are from FAO Stat. You can see the ranking and just the percent of global land. But it is important to realize that all of the 6 countries to the western part of Ukraine that border the western part are essentially the same size as what Ukraine is. The following graphs, and we'll probably go through these pretty quickly. You have these available to you, but one of the things, all of these graphs are going to be the same in terms of looking at production, then looking at exports, and then providing a little bit of summary. And so, and they're all going to be set up that the left-hand side are the southern countries, and the right-hand side are going to be the northern countries. And so you can kind of look at that. In terms of wheat production, one of the things to look at, you have the rank from a global 2022 production standpoint, and then you also have the production in metric tons. And kind of looking at this, we do see in Romania a little bit of growth over time in terms of wheat. In terms of Poland, you see a little bit of increase. Belarus has been increasing their production. Slovakia, Moldova, and Hungary have been relatively flat with regards to their wheat production. The next graph basically just indicates in terms of the production or the export. One of the things you'll see is that Romania has been growing in export really since 2005, where it was less than 2 million metric tons. In 2020, the most recent information we have available, it was 6 million tons in 2019. That fell quite a bit to about 4.5 in 2020. You also see a general increasing trend with regards to Poland. In 2020, Poland was ranked number 10 in the world for exports, Romania 11, Hungary 15, and then Slovakia 17. And so you can see kind of what's going on from a global wheat export type position. These graphs essentially will give the production for 2020. And again, this information is from FAO Stat. You can see that Belarus was 2.8 million tons. Hungary was 5.1 million metric tons. And you can see the big producer here is Poland at 12.4 million tons. To give a little bit of an indication in terms of where Ukraine was from a wheat perspective, the production in Ukraine was 24.9 million metric tons. And so, again, you can see just the relative importance of Ukraine from some of the neighboring partners. You can also look at the exports there, and I have the percentage of global exports. The other thing that I do have is the percentage exports as a percentage of the production. And you have to be careful with this number a little bit, simply because the way that those are calculated, but it does give you a relative feel for the amount that is exported versus the amount that is consumed. And so looking at this, Belarus basically consumes all of its wheat production, where Romania is exporting roughly 64% of its wheat production. And so it does give a little bit of feel for what's there. And then at the bottom, I'll consistently look at these for a number of commodities. In terms of looking at this, essentially the production of the 6 surrounding countries is roughly 30 million tons compared to Ukraine's 24.9 production. So you can add the 6 up and that'll give you roughly 20% more than the Ukrainian production. And from a world perspective, it's just 4%. From an export perspective, essentially, Ukraine exports a much larger percentage of their wheat production than the other 6 surrounding countries. If you want to go to the first discussion, you can get those slides on agmanager.info if you want to take a look at Ukraine, Russia, and the US. But looking at this, essentially, the 6 surrounding countries export only 74% of what Ukraine does from 2020 in terms of wheat. And they constitute 6.8% of the world's exports. And so quite a bit different there. Ukraine alone exports 9.1% of the world's exports. The next crop we'll take a look at is corn. One of the things that we saw from the Russia-Ukrainian situation was just the explosive growth that we've seen in corn production and corn exports in Ukraine roughly in the last 10 to 15 years. We see a little bit of growth in terms of Romania, in terms of production. In terms of Hungary is next. And then you have Moldova. The important thing to realize is the southern countries are kind of into the corn region. In terms of the northern countries, corn is just not growing much in those areas. Looking at the exports, Romania, again, since about 2006, has really expanded the production of, or the export of corn globally, going from less than 1 million metric tons to 6 million metric tons in 2020. You can see that Hungary grew very much in the mid 2000s, and that's kind of been up and down there. But Romania and Hungary are number 5 and number 7 from a global perspective with regards to corn exports. Ukraine ended up being about number 3 with regards to the exports. Ukraine was number 4 in exports during this period of time. And so Romania is right below, but much different in amounts. Again, corn is going to be more in the south, where not much in the north. Again, you can see the statistics there. The big thing is the 6 surrounding countries, primarily Romania and Hungary, are the big exporters with regards to that, but still they produce only 44% of what Ukraine exports, and they only make up 6.4% of the world's exports. And so Ukraine is much more important from a corn perspective than what we see in the 6 surrounding countries. In terms of production, while the production is about the same, Ukrainian is much more export focused than the other countries. The other countries consume a larger production or a larger percentage of their production. Soybeans, same type of thing. They're going to be southern in terms of Romania, Hungary, and Moldova. But if you look at the rank and if you look at the scale there, soybeans are relatively unimportant from a Black Sea type perspective, at least in these countries. Certainly, there's been some growth in Romania. But again, you're looking at less than 1 million metric tons with regards to the export market. Again, summarizing this, you can kind of see the production, the percentage of global production. All of these countries are well less than 1% of the global production. All of them are less than 1% of the global exports. And you can see the exports as a percentage of countries. Again, Ukraine produces 7.8 million metric tons of soybeans, at least they did in 2020. The other 6 countries make up 25% of the Ukrainian production and just 0.2%. And then you can also take a look at the 6 surrounding countries with regards to exports. The big thing is not so important with regards to that. We have a few maps here, not a lot, but we have Belarus in terms of 2 of their major production crops, barley and rapeseed. And so you can see where it is produced in these. These maps, as you can see, are from the Foreign Ag Service. And then we also have some for Moldova. With regards to looking at rapeseed and sunflower. And so you can, again, see where those are. Certainly, a lot of the rapeseed production is borders next to Ukraine, less so with regards to the sunflower production. In terms of looking at this, Romania is number 5 in terms of the rank of sunflowers. Hungary's number 8. Moldova's number 16. One of the things, at least, you look here, and again, sunflowers appear to be more south of Ukraine. You see growth in those, quite a bit of growth in Romania, quite a bit of growth in Hungary, and some growth in Moldova. If you look at the sunflower production in the northern countries, you just see a lot less in those areas. Exports, Hungary exports a lot of their sunflower oil. But again, it is less than 1 million metric tons in terms of its number 4 in the world. You see a little bit more activity with regards to Poland in the exports. But again, looking at this, again, those six countries surrounding, Ukraine only produce 35% of what Ukraine does. And they export 14% of what Ukraine does. Again, the Ukrainian exports globally for sunflower oil are 44%. And so Ukraine is very much important, much more important than the other regions where essentially these 6 countries only export 6%. And so from an oil production perspective, Ukraine is very, very important within this region. We haven't looked at rapeseed production. We're doing a little bit of that in this to give an indication of where we are from a rapeseed perspective. You see that rapeseed generally is going to be more of a northern crop, although there is quite a bit of rapeseed grown in Romania and also in Hungary. But Poland certainly is very large in rapeseed, and that is also one of the things that has occurred over time is an increasing amount of production in rapeseed since the mid 2000, that first decade with regards to that production level. And then you can also see the exports here. Again, Poland is a major exporter of rapeseed oil. We have seen an increase in Belarus with regards to the rapeseed oil perspective. And again, you see a split kind of between the northern and the southern countries. Again, rapeseed is more important in the other countries than it is in Ukraine. In terms of kind of looking at this, the Ukrainian production is 200, or the other countries are 229% of what Ukraine does, 8% of the world production. And then the exports also are much larger. We're going to move into livestock a little bit. And one of the things you'll also see with regards to livestock tends to be a little bit more important in the northern countries than it is the southern countries. From a beef perspective, the production of cattle is decreasing in Romania, Hungary, and Moldova. And so since the Soviet Union dissolved, essentially beef production has decreased. In terms of, you saw a little bit of beef production decrease in Poland until about the 2004, 2005, and then that's increased. We see a little bit of increased production of beef in Belarus. But again, relatively small numbers from a world rank perspective. These graphs here are thousands in terms of millions. And so you can see that there's virtually no exporting of cattle or beef coming from the Romania, Hungary, Moldova. But you do see that Belarus and Poland are a little bit more important with regards to that. Again, beef production is more important in the surrounding countries than it is in Ukraine. Essentially, the surrounding 6 countries produce about 3 times what Ukraine does. And then essentially the world, they only produce 1.5%. And then the export, same type of thing. They export about 9 times. And so pretty much most of the beef that the Ukrainians produce is consumed internal and less from an export type perspective. The next one we're going to take a look at is poultry. Again, kind of that same divide in terms of Poland is a large producer there. In terms of, then we have Hungary, Moldova with regards to that. Again, you do see an increasing trend in poultry in Romania, in Hungary, also in Poland, and also in Belarus. From an export perspective, again, Poland has really increased the poultry exports. You see some increases in the other countries, but Poland is number 3 in the world with regards to poultry exports. Looking at this, again, you can see that Ukraine is relatively less important in terms of poultry production, both on the amount produced and the amount exported. Essentially, these 6 countries produce 3.1% of the world's poultry, but they do export 11.5%. And again, the big player in this is Poland, exporting 8.4% of the global exports. And both in Hungary and Poland, the production of poultry is very much export orientated, where in Belarus, Moldova, Romania, and Slovakia, the majority is consumed within the country. Pork production, again, we can see flat pork production in Poland, relatively flat production in Belarus. Slovakia has actually decreased, a little bit of decrease on Romania, Hungary. Moldova's been fairly flat with regards to pork production. With regards to this, Poland is number 9 in the world in terms of exports. And so you can certainly see that that has increased quite a bit over time. Belarus, until about 2013, increased and then it fell. You can see the importance of Hungary with regards to the pork production. Again, Ukraine, basically the 6 countries around Ukraine produce almost 6 times the amount of pork that Ukraine does. Again, from a world production perspective, you're looking at 3% in those 6 countries. And then you can see that exports are roughly 35 times what Ukraine exports. And so pork exports are relatively less important. Poland is really the big player there, although essentially Poland does consume about 2/3 of what's produced. And so again, looking at that, you can get a feel with regards to just what the importance of pork is with regards to that. Then we'll finish up with milk production, just to give a feel. Poland's number 12, Belarus is number 22. You see increasing milk production in the northern countries, relatively flat in the southern countries. And this is fairly similar with regards to the whole situation with regards to the production there. Just the fact that the northern countries tend to focus more on the livestock production. The southern countries, while there is some livestock production, most of it's produced for internal needs, and they're more likely to export grain as opposed to animal products. Again, Poland's number 7 in the world from milk production exports or dairy exports. Belarus is number 11. And again, you can see that milk production is increasing, or milk exports are increasing drastically in Poland and in Belarus. To maybe summarize the milk production, again, milk production is relatively more important in the other 6 countries compared to Ukraine. Certainly the exports are about 95 times as much as what Ukraine produces. In this case, even though there is increasing exports, the percentage of production is relatively small. Most milk production in those countries is going to be for domestic use. And so maybe to summarize these from a crop perspective, in terms of giving an indication of the relative importance of Ukraine, in terms of wheat production, corn production, you can see that wheat production in the 6 countries is 120% of Ukrainian production, and it's about 4% of global production. So one of the things from a production perspective, there's the difference between corn, soybean, and sunflowers that Ukraine is very important. Relatively less important Ukrainian production with regards to rapeseed, beef, poultry, pork, and milk. And so you can kind of see from a global perspective what those 6 countries do with regards to the global production. In terms of exports, it's a little bit different picture in terms of while the other 6 countries produce more wheat combined than Ukraine does, they export less. And so Ukraine is very much of an export country compared to the relative surrounding countries. And you can see the difference with regards to exports. Certainly poultry exports from the other 6 countries, dairy exports from the other 6 countries are fairly important, approaching 10% of the global exports. And the final graph or slide here is basically Russia and Ukraine are really the major agriculture producers and exports in that Black Sea region. The other countries certainly are important, but they're nowhere near as important as Russia and Ukraine. In terms of looking at this, those 6 countries have roughly about the same amount of arable land as Ukraine. And so you can add those 6 countries together, add them up and look at that. In terms of population, the population there is about twice as much in those countries than Ukraine combined. And so there's more domestic markets than there is in Ukraine. And so the export ability of Ukraine is extremely important, especially in the grain sector from an agricultural perspective. In looking at this in terms of those 6 countries, Belarus, Hungary, Moldova, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia, have a larger focus on livestock production, rapeseed production, and wheat production than Ukraine. However, from an export essentially Ukraine has more focus on corn, soybeans, and sunflower than those other countries. Also, from an export perspective, it's fairly large. And so I've went through a lot of numbers. You have the slides, and so you can kind of look at those. I think the key thing, and hopefully we don't see an expansion of any of the conflict beyond that. But again, the situation that we're in today, certainly there's rumors of Moldova, certainly there's rumors of Belarus. In terms of, unfortunately, there's been threatening statements to Poland. And so hopefully this gives you a little bit of an indication in terms of where that production within that region is. So with that, I think we'll just open it up for questions. And so let me open up my chat to see if there's any questions. In terms of summarizing, I think the key thing is I think you can very quickly see from a strategic perspective why Ukraine is so important. Looking at that, the country of Ukraine is certainly blessed with agricultural resources. And if you move around the regions, essentially the major component is Ukraine. The other countries are less important. In terms of Dale Blasi has a question: what is the impact the Ukrainian situation is going to have on the efforts of the broader subject of sustainability through the lenses of food production? In some respects, and Antonina and I kind of discussed this, to me, I think a lot is going to rest with regards to ultimately whether or not Ukraine and whether or not Russia are going to be able to export through the Black Sea. The map that Antonina showed with regards to those 2 straits that go through Turkey are going to be very important, simply because if those are open, then commodity can go out of that Black Sea region, both from Russia and from Ukraine to the rest of the world. If those end up being closed to traffic, essentially you're going to look at major impacts with regards to the supply of wheat. Essentially, that would be about 30% of the world's supply, 14% of the world's export of corn. Most of that's going to go through there. Again, Antonina has very good information with regards to rail transport. It's important to realize, though, that water transport is much less than rail transport. And ultimately, in order to reach some of the markets that are being supplied in terms of Egypt, Turkey, Indonesia, those countries essentially will need water ultimately with regards to that. In terms of Indonesia and that, not only do you have the 2 straits in Turkey, you also have the Suez Canal that provides that transportation to some of those. And so that's certainly going to be important. And I think in some respects, as this conflict drags on, if it's not settled soon, essentially, I think in some respects, Turkey is going to be a very important player simply because of their ability to look at that. In terms of how might the influence of people into Poland impact their actions with regards to Ukraine cooperation and support? Also, there are investments of increased investment in rail track being laid down or routes being opened from places like Latvia. And I'll have Antonina talk about this in terms of geographically. Certainly, it'll be interesting to see if they can get those days down. In terms of one of the slides that Antonina indicated is that some of the loads were sitting 15 to 20 days to 30 days before they can go through different countries. And so while I think there's possibilities there in terms of I think rail, while it is an option, it's going to be a slow process, and that's a longer term solution, but it may be the only one we have. Antonina, do you have thoughts on that? You're muted right now. There you go.
Yeah, I have. I was talking about that how the influx of people into Poland will impact the economic situation. Actually, I'm also arrived to the US through Poland, and I would say there is plenty of people, Ukrainian people are on Poland, and Poland tried to support as much as they could Ukrainians, but Poland still will need some help in that, because now they use all the money that they have, like extra money from the tax payers, right, to support Ukraine and to provide some, they even provide some money per person, per child. They support family who host the Ukrainians families, so the children studying for free at schools, and so they provide a lot of benefits. And I think it's really important right now, because Poland understands that they are bordering with Ukraine, and if Russia would want to, I hope not, to continue this war, Poland is pretty close. So I think that influx of people into Poland is important also for Poland, because a lot of children came that would probably stay in Poland for future, and that is extra labor. That is a growing rate of average age in the society. So that is not bad for Poland, but they still will need some monetary, I guess, support because of so many new people from Ukraine.
There is a question from Tim. How do Russian crop exports compare to Ukrainian? Again, if Rich could maybe put where the previous slides are such that Tim could download those, but to give a big picture in terms of from wheat, Ukraine exports 9% of the global exports. Russia is 19%. And so from a wheat perspective, Russia is much more perspective, or much more important. From corn, essentially Ukraine exports 14.5% of the world's corn. Russia is 1.2%. And so Ukraine is much more important from that perspective. In terms of soybeans, neither one are very important. In terms of Ukraine exports 1%. In terms of Russia, exports 1%. And then in terms of sunflower, let me grab those numbers real quick off my computer. Hopefully I'm still there. I am. And so I'll pull those up here in a second in terms of sunflowers. Ukraine is much more important from a sunflower perspective. And I actually, or to the slide, in terms of from a sunflower perspective, exports of oil are much more important. Ukraine exports 44% of the sunflower oil globally, and Russia is 20.5%. And so sunflowers are much more important in Ukraine than they are in Russia. Although from a percentage of seed of global exports, Russia is about 20% of global exports from sunflower seed, and Ukraine is about 3%. And so Ukraine basically is much more important from an oil perspective, but relatively oil exports are 3 times in Russia, in about probably 18, 19 times, and maybe more than that. But most of the sunflowers are going to be exported as oil. Hopefully that helps there, Tim. Ukrainian egg and irrigation. Do you want to handle that one, Antonina? In the amount of irrigation in Ukraine?
Oh, actually, sorry, I lost because I tried to type the answers for some questions. Sorry, what was the question? Can you repeat, please?
What is the percentage of Ukrainian agriculture that's dependent on irrigation? Is there much irrigation in Ukraine, or is most of it rain-fed?
No, it's mostly in the south part, like Kherson Oblast, Odessa Oblast. It's not the whole territory of Ukraine. It's just on the southern part. I would say it would much less than half, about 40%, but I'm not completely sure on the figure right now. But this is only the southern part and maybe a little bit south west part. But in my region, for example, there is not much irrigation. We have enough moisture.
Anything else, folks? Be glad to have it if you have questions. I'll be sending an email out later this afternoon with the link for the recording, and I'll also have Dr. Featherstone's email on there. So if you think of a question later, you could write him. So be glad to have that, or you can send questions to me as well. Just reply to the email that I'll be sending out, or that I sent earlier.
I just found the number on irrigated land. It would be 21,600 square kilometers is the amount, according, and that was a 2012 estimate. And so you multiply by 100 to get those into hectares, Antonina, or is it 1,000?
Sorry?
Square kilometers to hectares. Is that multiplied by 1,000 or 100?
100.
Okay. So essentially there would be 216,000 square kilometers, and then you could multiply that by 2.5. And so less than 500,000 acres under irrigation in Ukraine, according to the CIA fact book. Question on Ukrainian egg, is that dependent on Russian diesel?
He was wondering if the diesel fuel that is used for egg production, is that dependent, does that come from Russia as a fuel supply, or where does the diesel fuel?
It's not only from Russia. It's arrived from different direction. It also arrives from Russia, but also from other countries. Since Ukraine got invasion in 2014, we started to diversify our import of fuel and all diesel. So it's not only from Russia. We also have, and also from Belarus, from Azerbaijan and other countries, Tajikistan, and from other countries like Asia countries like Arabia and others.
Good. Next question is, how big of impact is the southern portion if it gets completely taken over? And I think they're asking about agriculture. Maybe just discuss what the important areas for agriculture are, and is the southern area that is having, and maybe the eastern also, but the southern area, is that very important for agriculture, or is that more in the west?
Yeah, no, that is important also for agriculture, because mostly in southern area we produce a lot of sunflowers and some wheat as well. So, but the biggest importance is because of exit to the sea, because all southern areas has exit to the sea. So it both important for agriculture and for export.
Good, thanks. I'm going to give a last call here, and while I'm doing that, if you think of something, go ahead and write it in. But Antonina, thank you again. We appreciate you being on here. And Allen, thank you for doing that also. I haven't seen too much in that regard, so it's good to have that as well. Thanks for being on, folks. We appreciate it. Whoops, we did have a question come in. What in landmass does that compare to in the US? So how big would the Ukraine be if you were to put a map of Ukraine over the top of the US? Would it be the
Texas? The state of Texas.
The state of Texas. Okay, thanks. All right, I'm not seeing anything else, so I think I'm going to call it a day here. We appreciate you being on, and you can watch for that email with the link for the recording later today. You should have that. And again, thank you both for presenting this.